Hi, I'm John F. Allen. And I'm R.J. Sullivan. And we're the Two Towers.
Greetings and welcome to the Two Towers Talk Show. I'm your host, Tower One, John F. Allen.
And I'm Tower 2, R.J. Sullivan.
Today, we have a special guest, which R.J. will be introducing.
Thank you, John. I'm really excited about our guest today. It's someone I found earlier this year while I was on YouTube looking for reviews of vampire films, as one will do when one loves vampires as much as I do. I discovered, John, this is the Vampire Girl, just to be clear, not to be confused with any other vampire girls.
Of course.
And that's spelled Vampyre girl, because if you put in Vampire Girl, you will get many suggestions. So the at the front will help narrow her down. But she also identifies her name Kaili Ogden, and her channel has been up. Actually, I was surprised when I looked at this, a fairly short time, January 2021, and the Vampire Girl is a college student. Kaylee, I'm not, where do you go to college, or whereabouts are you?
I am in northern Utah going to college right now.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome to the show. And I want to talk about, when I found your channel, I was probably looking up Bela Lugosi reviews, or maybe the Frank Langella movie. I don't remember exactly which one brought you up, but usually when I go looking for reviews of older films, it's usually by older people, usually people in their 40s or 50s who have who bring like a classic film knowledge base to it. And I was kind of taken aback because you are a college student, you're very youthful and enthusiastic, and I was really impressed with how you just love all things vampire. And the description on your YouTube channel says, "I am a one-stop shop for all things vampire. From book and film reviews to analysis of folklore and science, I'm sinking my fangs into it all." Now, you know, the fun aside, you really do dig down pretty deep into the histories of whatever topic you're digging into. And another thing that really impressed me, for instance, when you're talking about films like the 1922 Nosferatu film, what I really love is the way you're as enthusiastic about films that, frankly, and I'm going to apologize because I think this is an important conversation, but there's no way to have it without maybe coming off a little bit condescending, but I really don't mean it that way. But it seems like there is a barrier between younger audiences and older movies that doesn't exist quite so much with people like the age of John and me. And I'm wondering if would you say that's a fair assessment, and how do you get around that?
No, you're totally right. Especially people my age, millennials, who grew up in this kind of middle ground where, things were just starting to become digitalized, and, we were moving from the age of Blockbuster into the age of like Redbox and Netflix. There is a huge disconnect between more modern audiences and films that were made in like the 20s and 30s. Now, you don't find that so much in like niche communities like the horror community. We're always willing to go back and dig into Nosferatu or White Zombie or Freaks or classics like that. But that's a very niche group. For modern audiences, if they can't have it on demand, if it can't be the quality that they're used to, then they don't have the patience for it.
So, I watched your introductory video back on video 1, and so I'm just going to ask you to kind of repeat that. So tell our viewers how you became hooked on all things vampire and Dracula at such an early age.
Well, my parents, especially, my dad was a huge lit nerd, so he loved all the classic literature. So he introduced me to classic lit at a very early age. He would read to me out of things like Ivanhoe and Dracula and the Scarlet Pimpernel. And then my mom, she will deny it now, but she was actually a horror fan in her 20s and 30s. So she loved like the TV serial dramas like Charmed and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so those shows kind of indirectly were part of my childhood. So she says she regrets it now because I turned out to be a spooky weirdo. But um it was my parents kind of fed into that initial love, and then I just kind of ran with it.
That's really interesting. So you watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a child?
Oh yeah.
See, that's interesting because for John and me, by the time we saw Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we understood like the irony of that show and the history of everything it was kind of poking fun at. And did there come a point where you kind of had to like watch it again to kind of understand the perspective it was coming from?
Yeah, I watched it I rewatched it when I started college, and it was different. I noticed a lot more things that it was doing, a lot more of the things that they were referencing and calling back to in the show. But as a kid, I just loved that it was scary and that there was this super cool teen girl who was like the hero of her town. It was awesome for little 5-6-year-old me.
Yeah, well, and it's funny. John will relate to this. It reminds me. I think the closest thing we have to that is the Adam West Batman series from the '60s, because as a kid, that's what was running and that's what was in reruns. And as a kid, you watch it, and I personally remember watching it and just taking it at face value, and I didn't understand a lot of the parody going on there, a lot of the comedy that they were going for. And then when I got older and I rewatched it, it was like, oh, now I see what they were doing. So yeah, I was trying to think about what it would have been like to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer as one of your earliest exposures to that kind of storytelling. So coming back to my original comment, how do you like remove those barriers when you're doing something like Christopher Lee's Horror of Dracula or Nosferatu, or something that kind of requires you to kind of put your thinking in a different place?
It was definitely different. The first, like when I started this channel, I was so sure that I was going to like certain films and dislike other films. So I was walking in with this bias of thinking that I knew better because I'm young and it's arrogance that comes with it.
I don't know what you mean. Do you know what she means, John?
The arrogance of youth.
Of course not.
But the more that I've experienced these films and the more that I learn about them, because I do like digging into how they were made and the directing mindset and the filmmaking mindset behind why and how these films were made, that it opens up this new appreciation for these films and for film in general. So the more I consume, the more I am able to learn, and the better I'm able to appreciate these movies for as good as they are, or as maybe not so good as they are.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever found yourself like talking to a peer and being like, no, really, give this a try. I think you really like it. I mean, that's kind of what you do in a lot of your videos anyway, but does that come from conversations you've had?
Definitely. I remember telling my friend Miranda, who has been on my channel, we do discussions kind
Yes,
of like you and John do. But I told her about Bram Stoker's Dracula, the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola movie, and she did not believe me. She did not believe that movie was as wild as I was telling her that it was. And she's like, there's no way that's going to be good. So I sat her down and I made her watch it, and she's like, well, you were right. This was wild and this was fantastic, and now I love it. So anytime she finds out I'm watching a new movie, she wants to be involved.
So
also,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, it's also with things like the 1922 Nosferatu movie. like we were talking about earlier, it's an older movie, it's black and white, it's a silent film. Um, but talking to people about that movie, they're like, wow, I never thought that, a silent film could be as gripping and as engaging as you're making it sound. So maybe I will give it a try because, you say it's really good and you've listed out your points, so I'll have to give it a try now.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize to our listeners that if you go onto her channel and you pick any topic, now you may disagree with what you think of the film overall. John and I were talking about Franklin Langella's Dracula. We have two very differing viewpoints on that. It's one of my favorites, and John doesn't think that much of it, and that's okay. But my point is the history and the way that you dig into the you do your research. You're very thorough about it. Whatever area it is that you're focused on, I come away learning things, which surprises me, because I'm old enough, and I've been following this genre for so long. I've come back to the idea that I know it all again too. But it's nice to be reminded that I don't. But you really do dig in deep on whichever topic that you're covering in that particular video. So two questions. Let's start with why the YouTube channel? How did that come about? Was that connected to a school project, or was that just something you decided to do on the side, or what brought that about?
Well, it's something I've been kicking around since like summer of last year. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, why not? Why not? It's vampires especially are a topic that I'm super into, super passionate about. I love learning about them. I love watching all these films and seeing everybody's different interpretations of this folkloric creature.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to think of ways to funnel all of that passion and that love for storytelling into a way that I could easily share it with people. And I say easily with the caveat that it is not easy. It is not as easy as I thought it would be.
It takes a little time, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I went in knowing that, everybody thinks YouTube is easy and it's not. So, but I didn't realize just how hard that it would be. But it was just, this whole channel was born out of this love for vampires and this love for storytelling. So if I could find a way to share that with people, then that's what I wanted to do.
Well, it certainly caught my attention, and it was nice to see the enthusiasm on whatever topic that is, whether that be one of the Hammer films, the Universal film, and you do the novels as well. You have a video out there on Camilla, which is one of the very earliest vampire novelettes, which I haven't actually watched that yet, but I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about that, because that's actually something I haven't read yet, and that's what I mean about you go digging into stuff, and so tell me a little bit about that process, when you've picked a topic, and you decide, okay, this is what we're going to discuss this time. Is it just because this is what you wanted to do, or is there a process that you go through?
Yeah. So I planned the first 6 months of the channel before I even started. I started planning in November of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew I wanted to start with Dracula because Dracula was like my origin story. And so I wanted to cover different Dracula films and compare them as adaptations to the novel. And I figured that would be a good in. Dracula is really popular. I could get views out of it, or whatever. And it's something that I love. So I was like, okay, I haven't watched some of these movies. It'll be a great excuse to actually sit down and enjoy them. So I did that, and then after Dracula came, Christianity. I covered vampires and their relationship to Christianity on the channel after that. And I thought that would be a good segue for, Dracula is very Christian heavy. They use things like the Eucharist and the crucifix to defeat Dracula and scare him away.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I wanted to cover the scientific side of vampires, as kind of a counter to that Christian perspective. And then between that, over the summer, it was June, so it was Pride. As a bisexual woman myself, I wanted to cover queer representation in vampire fiction. So that's why I did Carmilla. And then I also talked about the relationship that vampires have with the LGBT community. And after that was all planned, I was kind of like waiting to see if the channel would pick up before I planned anything else.
Okay.
So I kind of look at a topic I want to cover, and then I find media that surrounds that topic. So for Christianity, I found things like Field of Blood, which was a novel that I covered, and then things like Dracula 2000, where, you know, the Dracula in that film is Judas Iscariot. Spoiler alert, sorry. But yeah, so that's a little bit of how I choose what I want to cover.
Okay. So it sounds like you started off with Dracula, but more vampire related topics are forthcoming.
Oh yes, there is plenty to choose from in the vampire medium.
Absolutely. Yeah, in some ways some people might think that's kind of limiting, but it's really not. I was on Amazon Prime just last night and I just put in the word vampire and it's like, okay, here's a film that was made 6 months ago, here's a film that was made 10 years ago I've not heard of, but you know, it seems like everybody, all the small budget production companies out there seem like they try their hand at something and try to bring something new to the story, but you know, some with more success than others, I guess. But there's always something new out there if you're looking.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on Shudder last night, in fact, which is a horror streaming service, and there was a new vampire movie on there that I immediately added to my watch list, and I'm so excited to go tackle it tonight. But things like that, things like Salem's Lot is getting a new reboot. So vampires, a lot of people think that vampires were just a fad, especially around the Twilight, Vampire Academy, Blue Bloods era of the early 2000s. But we've been around for a long time, and we're gonna continue to be around.
Yes, indeed. Well, John and I remember in the late 70s and early 80s, Dracula kind of had a renaissance where there was some intense interest in that specific character for about a 4-year period of time. I know you're aware of the remake of Nosferatu. Did you make a video of that? I was trying to remember.
I did, yeah, and I did a discussion with that movie as well. It's a fun one.
Right.
Movie.
Yeah, and of course the Frank Langella. There was a TV series called Cliffhangers. I'm not sure you're aware of that one necessarily. It kind of got lost to time.
I haven't heard of that one.
So the concept there was there were 3 different shows within the show, and one of them was called The Curse of Dracula. And so you got a 20-minute clip. It was like a serialization, and produced by Kenneth Johnson, who did things like The $6 Million Man and The Incredible Hulk and lots of big things from the 70s. But 20 minutes at a time, they would basically, you know, resolve the previous cliffhanger and then go on, and the story would unfold a bit further, and then the heroes would get in trouble again and Dracula would be about to kill them again, and then they put up the cliffhanger. Show lasted about a year. It's mostly forgotten for good reason. The Dracula segment is a little more interesting than the other 2 and had a legit following. I was like 12, so I was watching it totally uncritical and completely into it. It's not aged well, but it's kind of fun just to go. You can find like the clips on YouTube and stuff just to kind of watch for fun. But so, and then, are you familiar with Love at First Bite? I'm sure you are.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So all of that was like within a 2 or 3 year block of time. And it was like Dracula was the thing. And then, you know, like you say, Anne Rice kind of became the thing for a while, and then then we had Buffy, and it just go on, and vampires just keep coming back. They just keep coming back over and over. Every time it seems like they've told all the stories, someone comes along and finds a new way to go about it. So I think that's part of my intrigue about it as well.
Yeah. And I think vampires especially are a very human monster. They represent a lot of the fears that we have just inherently as people, the fear of being othered, the fear of not being in control of the things that we do, the fear of having to leech off of other people in order to survive, and the fear that, I equate vampires a lot with addiction, because they are just compulsorily driven to do things that are harmful to themselves and to people that they had previously cared about. So I just feel like vampires are not going to go away because vampires are so human.
You can definitely make them fit a lot of different analogies. One thing that I've come to discover as I get older is the passage of time, and how vampires don't change so much, and how they see time kind of slip past them. I think Anne Rice covers a lot of that very well, where it seems like no matter how hard people try to keep up with what's going on, and no matter how much people don't want to get older, we get into a certain mindset. And one of the messages I think Anne Rice has is nobody's immune to that, even if you live 500 years. it still kind of catches up with you. So there's that as well. So one of John's favorite things, I don't have this written down, but are you familiar with the Marvel Comics Dracula run? Have you had an opportunity to check that out, or has anybody pitched that to you?
I've heard of it, but I've never actually read the comics.
They're actually really good. I'm gonna let John cut in here if he'd like to.
Yes. So as a kid growing up, I was a big comic book fan, and Marvel had a series of monster comics. And the Tomb of Dracula started off as like this magazine, black and white digest, but then they also ran color comics, and it was a monthly comic. And the way that Dracula was portrayed, in my opinion, was more along the lines of, I guess, the closest movie film adaptation that I can think of would be along the Hammer Films line, but a little bit, I don't know, more arrogant and slightly darker, if you can imagine that, in certain spots. I have a love of vampires. My favorite paranormal creature is the werewolf, but vampires and werewolves have always been my top two. But as far as the comic book series was concerned, it was interesting because as a comic book reader, you're seeing these stories unfold with the Tomb of Dracula. And Dracula works best if he's not the heart of the story. And I say that to say that other people react to him, and he's kind of like in the background doing things that are manipulating these things. And then you get these big confrontations. To me, that's how Dracula works best in any medium. So these comics had a way of doing that, and they did it very well. And it was very well written, very well illustrated at the time. This was like the 70s. And then they also did Werewolf by Night and Frankenstein's Monster and The Living Mummy. They had all the they basically had all the beats of all of the classic horror films and horror characters, and they really did a good job with it. I would highly recommend you to go back and check out the digest, give them a read. I would be interested to know what you think about them. And just to tie in to what you've already discussed with RJ, I would say that I'm kind of with you. I thought that Bram Stoker's Dracula was people were harder on it than I was. I found it, and I know this is much to the contradiction of how RJ feels about it. I found it to be a much better film than the Frank Langella film by wide margin. Not just because of character likability, but by cinematography standards and writing standards and acting standards. With all of that being said, I think that it wasn't the greatest film to represent vampires, but it was of its time. And I think that's a thing with vampires and films and television shows. They seem to be of their time. Not a lot of them tend to, I guess, age well with regards to the new generations, and they have to be kind of reintroduced softly to have an effect that's going to bridge the gap. And I think that some series are just better than others with regards to how they impact various generations, and I think Buffy is one of them. That that was a millennial. The millennials love Buffy, but us Gen Xers love her too. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one of those situations. Whereas the Hammer films, maybe not so much the millennials and more the Gen Xers and the Boomers are going to have fond affections for those films. So I think that when you're looking at these films and you're looking at the other mediums like the comics and the novels or whatnot, you're going to have various camps, but I think that some are going to resonate across generations better than others, and some are going to age better than others.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
And I completely agree with what you said about Dracula working best in the background, because that's how he is in the book. That's what he was created to be, this creeping force of darkness that manipulates from the shadows. And so I'm definitely going to check out the comics, and I appreciate the recommendation. But yeah. I agree with what you said about the Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think the reason that I ended up loving that movie so much was that Coppola had a real love for the book and a real love for the characters, and it came through in spades in the movie as this indulgent, sink your teeth in, have a good time, enjoy this adaptation kind of film.
Yeah, I'm on record as not being a huge fan of it, although I will admit it is great filmmaking. I don't take that away from it. I just find as a story it doesn't work for me personally. I understand why it has the accolades it does. I remember going into the movie theater expecting certain things and just finding that as a plot it didn't track really well. And as I have rewatched it, because something like that, being such a huge fan, I have to kind of like give it another chance every few years. This last time I watched it, I think was the time I appreciated it most. That was earlier this year. And I'm kind of like letting go of my old preconceptions and trying to kind of let it in more. And I've come to really appreciate its artistry, even though I can't say I still don't think it's 100% successful, but I've come to appreciate the filmmaking on display when I watch it. And it definitely is a labor of love. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. And it is a wild movie. It's not for everyone. It is a trip and a half. It is insanity from start to finish. So I can see why some people don't like it as much. So right. I enjoy it, but I can see why other people wouldn't.
Yeah. I think it would be, I think it's interesting because you think of it as an older movie. I feel the gray hairs popping every time you say that. I don't know how John feels too, but I'm just going, I was working full time at an insurance company when I saw that in the theater, So, I mean, there's definitely that difference there, but, That is definitely one where I have a difference of opinion with most other fans, and I acknowledge that. I'm in a minority opinion. I have come to appreciate it as I have watched it over the years. I can see, I am coming to see its virtues. It took me a while to get there, I will admit, but I understand. I'm starting to understand some of the appeals that were not evident to me the first few times I saw it. But that we're not really here to talk about that. You said something in your introductory video before we get into Count Dracula of 1977. Although you did tee me up quite well. I'm gonna hold off a little bit longer. Another thing I will admit is I found Dracula the novel very difficult for a number of years to just actually sit down and read from beginning to end. I would say I probably had about 6 false starts before I finally got through it, and now I've read it several times since, and it seems like you and I both discovered a certain Tim Curry audiobook that has become one of my favorite things here in the past year or so. I don't know when you read it, but I thought they did a fabulous job adapting the novel. But I had trouble with that. So that said, tell me how you came to become such a fan of that book at such an early age.
Well, I first had, as a kid, I was a child, so we had the Great Illustrated Classics version of the book, and I like slept with that thing. I loved that book, and I had tons of classics in that style. I had Great Expectations, King Solomon's Mines, all the Great Illustrated Classics versions. So I didn't actually get my hands on the full book until I was in high school. And when I checked the book out from my school library, like the good child I was, and I took it home to read it, and I had such a hard time getting into it because the first chapter is just Jonathan talking about Transylvania and what he's eating, and I was like, when do we get to the vampires? I don't remember this. But of course I didn't remember it because I was reading an incredibly abridged version. So,
and I know you love Jonathan so much, but we'll get there. Go on.
We'll get there. We'll get to Sweet Johnny. So it took me a couple of years to actually read the full book. And I know that's like me handing over my vampire card, saying that I couldn't get into the book itself for a little while. But I eventually did get an audiobook version of it, not the Tim Curry one, which I'll talk about that in a sec, but the audiobook gave me enough courage, quote unquote, I don't know the word, to actually go back in and sit down and read the full thing, which I eventually did. And then I fell in love with it all over again as an adult. And then the Tim Curry audiobook I found maybe 2018. I've had it for a while. And that just swept me away. The performances in that audiobook are so good. It's with Tim Curry and Alan Cummings.
Yep.
And it's a fantastic. I think Dracula should be read by a full cast. That is how you should experience it because that's the way it's written. And I just fell in love with it. I've listened to that audiobook version, not lying, probably 150 times. Because it's become such a comfort. It's become a comfort thing to me. Yeah. So I listen to it while I'm driving, when I'm traveling. I love it so much.
I discovered it. I was reading it for Halloween last year. That was where I was looking for something to read. I'm like, it would be fun to do that. And then I saw narrated by Tim Curry and Alan Cumming, and I said, sold. But so it was a year ago was when I read it. But yeah, so to talk about something we have in common, I consider myself a huge vampire fan, a huge Dracula fan, but he is presented so differently than he is in the novel that I had to struggle. I don't think we're unique there. I think the novel can be a bit unapproachable for a while. It's really kind of a test to kind of set aside your expectations. It's kind of, you could almost say this about so many adaptations of Dracula, set aside your preconceptions of what modern movies are, what modern novels are, and meet it at its own terms. And sometimes that some things can be more challenging than others, but it took me a while, but I also came around to really love the novel. Even though I never would have thought so, probably as early as 10 years ago. So there you go.
And the other thing is the format that it's written in epistolary, so journal entries, newspapers, and you don't see a lot of that anymore.
No.
So approaching it without having that kind of experience with that kind of literature before can be off-putting. It can be you can find the pace to be a little weird if it's not something that you're used to, but it is definitely something that should be checked out. Definitely.
Yeah, and then there's the problem with the last half, which is, where is Dracula? Exactly. So while just to emphasize, you're a legit fan of the Universal Bela Lugosi Dracula. You're a legit fan of the Christopher Lee Hammer films. Have you gone through that set of Hammer films yet?
I have not dived into the rabbit hole that is every Hammer Dracula film, because I know there are 6 or 7 of them.
There's quite a few, yeah. And they're diminishing returns, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah. So I haven't jumped into that hole yet, but Horror of Dracula was a really enjoyable movie.
Absolutely. So. And I would vouch for Prince of Darkness, which is the immediate sequel. And Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. I think those are the 3 great ones in the set. After that, they're making money, people got paid. That was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by OG Nerds, a new social media community dedicated to nerds of a certain age, 40 and over, although all are welcome. Members are encouraged to share articles and links on their favorite nerdy topics such as animation, anime, art, books, writing, comics, manga, movies, music, sports, tech, science, TV, video games, RPGs, and more. Be sure to visit them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Two Towers Talk Show is sponsored in part by Showtime Cinema in Mooresville, Indiana. Their friendly staff is always willing to go the extra mile to make your movie-going experience an enjoyable and memorable one. Enjoy the comfort of their new cushioned seating in their spacious auditoriums, and while you're there, be sure to stop by the concession stand and purchase some popcorn where real butter topping is an option. They're located at 300 South Bridge Street in Mooresville, Indiana. We hope to see you at the movies.